Need Bitcoin support? The pros at Coinbase Connect are here to help. Learn about self-custody, privacy, mining, lightning payments, and much more. Simply go to coinbase.com/connect and schedule a one-on-one video call with a Bitcoin pro. Take your knowledge to the next level by connecting with a pro on coinbase.com today. Please check out episode 41 with Adam O, aka Denver Bitcoin on Twitter, episode 46 with Hodl Tarantula, or episode 49 with Adam Meister. All are pros you can connect with at coinbase.com connect today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. My name is Chris Alamo, and I am an amateur investor. This podcast is my open source journal of everything I learn about investing and wealth management. I'm here to explore the key concepts, market dynamics, and investing strategies that will assist you on the path towards financial independence and financial literacy. My mission is to build us from amateurs to experts. All suggestions are my own, and I recommend that you should do your own research before taking any investment advice. See you in this week's episode. I hope you enjoy. All right, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode 54. Can't believe I'm already on 54 episodes of the Amateur Investors. But on this episode, I will be interviewing Bitcoin QnA, a pseudo-anonymous personality on Bitcoin Twitter and a Bitcoin privacy expert in the space. QnA, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey Chris, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on, and I'm looking forward to diving in with you. And I've been listening to a couple of your podcasts recently, and like what you're doing over at the Investors Podcast. So I'm excited to have a chat.
Thanks so much, QnA. That means a lot to me. What kind of started as just an investing podcast, definitely been orange pilled and definitely been a lot more Bitcoin related content, especially in recent months, and kind of transitioning to more of a Bitcoin podcast. But I think it's very important, and I think what you do is brilliant, and I think you're very important in the space. So I guess I'll start where I ask a lot of the Bitcoiners that come on the show. How'd you get into Bitcoin, and ultimately what let you down the Bitcoin rabbit hole?
Yeah, I've got quite a sort of typical rabbit hole story. Unfortunately, it doesn't start with Bitcoin. It starts with altcoins. I got sucked in right at the top of the 2017 hype cycle. Got sucked in by the marketing of Litecoin. That at the time it was touted as the silver to Bitcoin's gold, and it was faster than Bitcoin, had faster block times, and it was cheaper transactions. And me being really naive, thought this was going to be the new Bitcoin killer, as most of these things are touted as. Aped into that right at the top of the market. Continue to sort of watch YouTube videos and stuff like that on Litecoin, and continue to buy as the price went down, thinking, it's just a temporary dip. It's gonna go back up, and that trend continued right the way down until my sort of Litecoin stash was next to worthless, along with the rest of the market. And sort of right at the bottom, we're talking sort of back end of 2018 now. I stumbled across various other YouTube videos. Andreas Antonopoulos, he'll be a typical rabbit hole contributor to most people, I would have thought. So he, at the time, he was primarily focused on talking about Bitcoin. I also, because I was still interested very lightly in trading at the time, started to stumbled across Tone Vays's videos, and he, for all he's got his faults, he kept rabbiting and repeating the phrase that, and it stuck with me to this day, that this bear market won't be over until all of the shit coins had died. And at the time, I was quite into Litecoin and a couple of other coins, and he kept saying it over and over again. And he used to do daily videos, and eventually something tweaked in my head to think, he might not actually be as crazy as he sounds here. And that sort of led me to think, well, if he's got so much conviction in Bitcoin, why is that? So then I started to just look to other avenues, different podcasts, different books. I've got a lot to thank for Marty and Matt over at TFTC, Stefan Lavera, obviously Bitcoin only shows, that's where my conviction really started to gain traction. So then bought my sats. Everybody thinks they're late, but first bought my first sats at the start of 2019, and then the rest is history. The rest is, since then, it's just been Bitcoin only, and it's been a daily quest for knowledge. Read more, focus more on the sort of technical side of understanding how the network and the protocol works. Getting involved in different communities and the different rabbit holes that leads down in terms of privacy, nodes, wallets, that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that really grips me, to the point now where I sort of made a modest sort of name for myself, I guess. And I actually work full time in the space now. Started with a company called Foundation Devices a couple of months ago. We make an air-gapped hardware wallet called Passport. Absolutely living the dream now, working full time in the space, doing what I love. I guess I kind of skipped a pretty big part in the fact that throughout that journey, I started to produce tutorials and guides on how to use wallets, nodes, how to improve your privacy, how to buy via no KYC sources, all Bitcoin focused, of course, which I guess is what sort of contributed to me gaining, or sort of a little bit of a reputation for being an educator, I guess, as much as that makes me cringe inside to say that about myself. Just found a real love for helping people get onboarded, because I was just having conversations with people that were entering the space and that were asking the questions that I was asking, 6 months or 12 months before that, thinking I could see myself in them. So I felt like a personal responsibility, I guess, to help those people get onboarded, and to, I guess, in the hope that in another 6 to 12 months that they'll do the same. And that's how we continue to spread this Bitcoin virus across the world.
That's awesome. It's not a story that's unsimilar to many other Bitcoiners, it sounds, whether, experimenting in alts and kind of the tail end of 2017 and early 2018. I know a lot of the people that I look up and respect in the space or that work for Bitcoin companies nowadays, very similar with either trading 2016, 2017, 2018, ultimately the market collapsing and crashing in 2018. And then now kind of through conviction, or I guess just knowledge of going through other podcasts, are now full-time Bitcoiners, whether in the space or just Bitcoin only. I was very fortunate. I'm kind of class of 2020. So like you've said before, ultimately you feel late joining in where you joined in 2019 and I joined in 2020. Ultimately mine came because of an awakening, because of everything that was going on in the macro environment of the pandemic. So in March of 2020, when everything crashed, and then lo and behold, a few months later, everything was recovering back because of what central bank monetary policy. So obviously, in all of that, while I do still personally own equities because of retirement accounts, whether they be 401k contributions and things like that are really difficult from a tax advantage perspective in order to sell those to buy more Bitcoin. I obviously liquidated a lot of this stuff that's just in normal investing accounts and put that all into Bitcoin. And ultimately, I got very lucky that I had a very short altcoin career that I basically, because of unit bias, I had one Ether at one point, nowhere near the current price that it was. So I guess in hindsight, had I bought that, waited, and then flipped it into Bitcoin, I could have had, in theory, more Bitcoin from the Ethereum that I bought. But I have no regrets in flipping that pretty early. I bought it for maybe a month or two max, and then realized, okay, it's Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. So ultimately kind of sold, not at a loss, at a slight gain for Ethereum. And then basically, lo and behold, a few months later, it went on a run, and that would be worth more in Bitcoin now. But like I said, I'd prefer to have the Bitcoin than all the issues that Ether has had in all my research, which is really funny, just being on Bitcoin Twitter and seeing when people are trying to transfer $10 worth of Ethereum and it costs $150 or $50. So it just seems like a very broken coin in and of itself, especially when you have quotes of Vitalik, the lead programmer of Ethereum, basically saying, what was the quote from 2014? Basically saying, oh, it should never cost at least like 7 cents to do a transaction. And how that quote is really biting him in the ass now.
Yeah, everybody's got that what if story, haven't they? About where somewhere along the line, unless you're very, very lucky and you came in and immediately went Bitcoin only, that everybody's got that story of what if I hadn't have bought X, then I would have had so many more sats than I've got today. So, but I think as much as it's a harsh lesson to learn, I think it's a very, very valuable one. And it's me watching my wealth disappear in Litecoin throughout the course of 2018. It was just a necessary evil in that to get me to where I am today, really. And I guess if people, educators like yourself and myself, and there's loads of others like us, if we can put out as much content as we can to try and ensure that less people have to do that as part of their onboarding journey, then it can't be a bad thing.
Definitely. I completely relate. I know you brought up a bunch of the educators, whether it's Andreas Antonopoulos or Stefan Livera. I had the pleasure or the luxury of I was able to go to the TAB conference, or the Atlanta Bitcoin conference. It was a few weeks ago. And it was my first Bitcoin conference because, one, I'm new to the space, and ultimately I had prior commitments to other family and friend events for the Bitcoin conference and BitBlock Boom, both much bigger conferences relative. But I guess the Atlanta Bitcoin conference was very cool. I got to meet a bunch of the developers. I got to meet Alex Svetsky. I got to meet Stefan Livera, and there was actually a charity poker tournament. And no joke, Stefan Livera got to sit to my left, and I got to play poker against him. He's one of the cool dudes. Nice. It was very, very cool experience talking to him. He went out before me, so that makes me feel better that I beat Stefan Livera at poker, and it was cool. Just a lot of the Bitcoiners were in awe of him being there. He's very highly respected in the space, and it was cool just seeing him and a lot of the core developers, or even a lot of the more renowned influencers or people in the space. And, they're just people too. And, they're looking out for the same reasons, that, the Bitcoin ethos, that the freedom that it provides, the culture that it provides, and kind of the truth seeking that ultimately Bitcoin is. So it was really cool talking to them, and just kind of, I've never met them in person. I've only ever really heard their voices from one way to the other on podcasts. And it's just Bitcoin's a very interesting space. That this is my first time meeting them in person, that everyone's conjoined by the truth of what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin does. And yeah, obviously there's disagreements and different personality types, but ultimately, these are people that you can be very close with, that you've never met, because of the ideals that, like, the principles of what you believe in are built on. It was just a very, very cool and humbling experience. It was awesome. And I learned a lot from just only this experience alone. First time really going to a real Bitcoin conference. Sorry,
yeah,
that was a long
I'm a bit jealous of that, actually. I'm a bit jealous of that because it looks like for your first conference, it looks like you picked a really, really good one. The panels that they had there look really, really strong, and I'm a little bit jealous of that, actually.
Yeah, it was excellent. I'm very fortunate that I was actually born in Atlanta, and I still have family that resides there. So it was cool getting to visit family during the evenings, and wear my stay there while going to the conference during the day and afternoon, and meeting all these people. Yeah, like I said, it was very, very cool experience. And maybe some of it was a little bit technical over my head in terms of development, especially about like the Lightning devs and even the core developers of what they were saying, the programming. I am not as comfortable in programming myself, but valuable nonetheless. All right, so I guess going on to the next topic, and I know you kind of brought it up a little bit there. So I guess I want my listeners to help understand what KYC is, or know your customer, or ALM, which is anti-money laundering laws. I know you're from the UK and I'm from the United States. I know before we even got going into the podcast, you said they're very similar. But I guess, what are the socio-political reasons for passing these laws? And in opinion, do they work, or are they just kind of a psyop for anyone who opposes, I guess, a G7 nation, or a top nation such as the United States or the UK, which also includes its own citizens that they use against?
Yeah, so just a brief outline on KYC as it relates to Bitcoin for those that are sort of less familiar with it. It's essentially a regulation that is imposed on any business that has a banking relationship, that basically dictates that business entity has to collect a certain amount of information on all of their customers before they do any business with them. So that, generally speaking, that is like your driver's ID or a passport, a selfie, your home address. Sometimes they want proof of funds if you're sort of going to make a large deposit, so they'll need to see like bank statements. And weirdly, which is kind of a bit dystopian, but some exchanges now are asking for like video, like face scans, so they can build like a 3D profile of your head, which is somewhat scary. But again, all of this information is just designed to basically, as it says on the tin, KYC, know your customer, so that they know who they are dealing with. So I'm one of the proponents that likes to sort of raise or talk about the elephant in the room in terms of KYC when it comes to Bitcoin, that just warning people of the dangers of it, really, that, generally speaking, these exchanges that sell Bitcoin and allow you to buy Bitcoin are not malicious. They do this because they have to. I'm sure they wouldn't do it if they didn't have to, because I'm sure it probably cost them a fair bit of money to do as well. The problem arises that, if you provide all this information to an entity that allows you to buy Bitcoin, there's a lot of entities that don't have a great track record of securing this data very well, let's say. There's been unfortunately loads and loads of hacks announced, it seems like every week at the moment, where AT&T or T-Mobile have had a database hack, or Facebook, or Binance or Coinbase, or where they just have failed to secure this information properly. So the fallout from that is that the wrong people are getting their hands on all of your personal information, which they can go and use to commit various different amounts of fraud, which, it generally speaking, in the fiat world, if somebody defrauds your credit card, you're going to get that money back. Tie that into where you have a bearer asset like Bitcoin, which is hopefully under the control of, you've got some self-custody of it, so you're controlling your own keys. If an attacker is going to get your name, address, phone number, driver's license, God forbid, sometimes, unfortunately, this was the case with Coinbase, that how much Bitcoin you own, that's going to make you a pretty juicy target to the wrong people. Where you can, I suppose it's kind of analogous to painting a big red cross on your door and saying, hey, I've got Bitcoin, why don't you come and pay me a visit? And unfortunately, there has been instances where people have been, they've had their houses broken into and they've been held hostage until they give up their private keys, and they've lost Bitcoin, which is really, really sad, and is really, a doomsday scenario, and probably, might be scaring the shit out of some of your listeners. Apologies for swearing if this isn't a swearing podcast.
No, it's fine.
So this is where I come in, and many others like me, that just try and shine a light on some of the risks of this, because I suppose the flip side to the coin is that, you can go to Cash App or Coinbase and you can go through this setup process. Once you've done that setup process, you can buy Bitcoin really, really easily, and it's really approachable for new people entering the space. I absolutely get that. I just try to shine a light on the other side that people don't like to talk about, where this is a risk. If you give this, if you give multiple entities like this your personal information, the likelihood is eventually it's going to get hacked and the wrong people are going to get their hands on it. And if you don't have your Bitcoin security on lock, obviously only you'll know what that means for you and your value and your personal situation, then you are going to be at risk. So I kind of try and shine a light on that, and then highlight the alternatives where people can use like peer-to-peer exchanges, which I can go into if you want. But yeah, so why do the governments enforce these KYC rules? They do it under the veil of stopping terrorism, stopping money laundering, things like that. In my opinion, the reality is only the little man gets hurt, because criminals are going to get around these laws. And in actual fact, criminals use KYC information. They'll go onto darknet markets and they'll buy it so that they can commit money laundering using somebody else's details. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg problem, where the regulations that have been introduced to quote unquote protect the consumer are the ones that are actually exploiting the consumer and enabling the criminals to do the stuff that these regulations were supposedly designed to stop. So it's kind of a bit of a paradox, unfortunately. So there are alternatives. I can go into them if you want me to.
Yeah, I guess I'll just expand on that real quick before you go into them. But it's exactly kind of what you said, that basically you're centralizing your information and to a single entity or entities, that it sounds like a good thing, and it sounds like it's here to protect the little guy, but I think it really hinders them. I saw a stat that only 0.1% of transactions are caught using a lot of these methods. So obviously the 99.9% are just everyday transactions. And if, let's be honest, if I think the amount of illegal activity or illicit activity is much higher than 0.1% of all transactions. I know that there's a lot of times politicians, both in the US and abroad, are always quick to say, oh, well, Bitcoin's only used for evading taxes. It's only used for illicit transactions. It's only used for nefarious things, where I don't think that could really be further from the truth. Obviously, that is the case. Like, there are people that do that, but there's people that use that with any fiat currency, whether it's the British pound, the US dollar, the euro, the yen, the yuan, whatever currency you want to say. The amount of illicit activity is like 100-1 with the fiat currency compared to Bitcoin. And I know that they have tracked it. I think they said like last year alone, there was maybe $30 million equivalent of illicit activity used on Bitcoin. I guess the FBI figured that, or the CIA, where they said through fiat currencies, it's like in the billions that is done every year, or if not trillions, that is done illegally in money laundering or illicit activity. So when you're thinking about it, like in terms of scale, it's definitely absurd, the level of degrees of magnitude of difference between the two. And I think a lot of people have brought this up in the Bitcoin space before. It doesn't make sense to use Bitcoin as for illegal activity, really, because it's a peer-to-peer network and it's fully open source, and you can audit the chain of Bitcoin. Obviously, there's a lot of privacy tools that come into play that can make it more difficult to find out. But if I were to do something illegal and pay you money, for example, or any other counterparty, and then it's published to the main primary blockchain or layer one, obviously someone could eventually figure that out, that, hey, this is kind of a nefarious transaction, and they can back calculate backwards. So I guess that's kind of a long-winded response, but I've made, I guess, my fair share of mistakes when it comes to using Bitcoin, whether buying on Robinhood or Cash App or one of these other apps. But I guess QnA, why would you think Bitcoin privacy is so important, and why does it appear, even in the space for people that are really renowned Bitcoiners, why is it so overlooked?
Yeah, I think I'll start with why is it overlooked, and I think the unfortunate truth is that most people just don't care. Unfortunately, we're 21st century. Most people are used to sharing most of their lives online. They're used to having very little privacy. It's the normal now to have an Alexa, surveillance speaker in your living room. And people have just got just been normalized to the fact that they think that they don't need privacy, or they don't find value in it. And the Bitcoin space is no different with that. The old adage goes, unfortunately, is, I've got nothing to hide, so why do I need to be private? And unfortunately seems to be gaining a little bit of traction. So why is it important with Bitcoin? Well, you kind of touched on it a little bit with the fact that the Bitcoin blockchain, the ledger of transactions, is completely open. Anybody with an internet connection can go onto a block explorer and look at any single transaction they like. The sort of pseudonymity of Bitcoin, comes in here a little bit, where, if you were to go onto a block explorer, all you'd see is, address A is sending to address B is sending to address C, and so on and so forth. So Bitcoin can be private if used correctly. The problem is, and this sort of links me back to my previous answer, is that most people come into the space and provide their personal information to obtain Bitcoin, which essentially sort of links their personal identity to their Bitcoin holdings. So if they were to then withdraw from Cash App or from Coinbase to a wallet that they can control, which is a really great idea, it's trivial for an even semi-sophisticated chain surveillance firm, or again, anybody that knows what they're doing, to see that withdrawal come from an address that is tagged to your name and go to another address, which is, it's presumed that it's the same entity, because let's just say that you bought 1 million sats on Coinbase and you sent 1 million sats less some fees to a new address. That's blatantly obvious that it's the same person. So it's then trivial from then on, like you say, to follow that chain of transactions and with a fairly decent level of certainty, follow where those funds are going. So this is where the privacy tools come in, really, to be able to sort of break that chain of transactions, at least for the onlooker. So tools like CoinJoin, where you can obfuscate your transaction history, it is a very important one, particularly with a transparent ledger like Bitcoin's. The problem arises a little bit is that these tools, it's changing slowly, but these tools are not as easily accessible or as approachable as, let's say, the shiny user experience that the exchange that they've bought on has got. There's a lot of extra steps required to be able to achieve that. And most people, work long hours, they've got kids, they just want to sort of preserve some wealth and be done with it and forget about it. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why it's overlooked, aside from the fact that, there's a slightly bigger barrier to entry to be able to do this properly, and you're not alone in making those mistakes. I touched on it with my rabbit hole story. I made exactly the same ones. I bought on KYC exchanges, I reused addresses, I did all of the usual pitfalls, and it's taken me a long time to be able to get somewhere close to being comfortable with the fact that the stats that I've got now are private, and I've got a chance to sort of stand up against these chain surveillance firms a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's very important. And I guess something that's very difficult for me and even a lot of the newcomers to the space. So obviously when you're learning about Bitcoin, you're kind of seeing to go from one address to another address, whether it's a long string of words and numbers. And you're like, oh, well, this kind of masks my identity. But exactly to you, what you said, like, anyone who is a hacker and gets information from the exchange that you bought it from, or even these chain analysis companies that aren't even doing anything nefarious, if they were able to figure out you bought 1 million sats, it went from one address to this address they suspect to be yours, they can then track your transactions very much like a bank does today. So I guess in Bitcoin's open source nature, that anyone can audit the supply or look at all the transactions that have ever occurred at any one time, I guess you are mentioning coin joining, which is basically the way that it describes to people is like, let's just say you and 3 other people have different amounts of money, and they're in I always talk about in singles or single dollar bills. And let's just say you were to all throw them in the pile or in a pot, and then you slowly over time pull out $1 and you give them to each person. It would be very difficult for you to figure out whose dollars belong to who, and ultimately, whether you start with the same amount of money or a slight variation after you account for fees, you could basically have that you've secured the transaction. It'd be very difficult to figure out which dollar belonged to which person. I know that's kind of confusing in nature, and Bitcoin is very more complex than that, but would that be a good description? And I guess what, aside from using CoinJoin or methods like this, do you also gain some privacy from things such as Taproot, which was just activated, or even a lot of the layer 2 and layer 3 transactions that occur but really don't finally settle to the layer 1 blockchain that everyone's more familiar with when you're trying to look on a blockchain explorer, or even just kind of looking at the auditing the supply?
Yeah, so the analogy you use is perfect. The other one I like to use is that if you have an amount of gold and you smelt it down, and then you can sort of resmelt it into the chosen pieces of the size that you would like. There could have been that initial bar of gold could have been owned by 5 people. And then if you sort of smelt that down into 5 different, smaller sizes piece of gold, there's no way to tell which bit went where. So yeah, it's a good analogy, and it just sort of adds that extra layer of, I like to say that it puts sort of a brick wall in your transaction history, whereby somebody might be able to follow you up to that CoinJoin transaction, but after that CoinJoin transaction, there's multiple different paths that they would have to follow to be able to sort of consider which one might be you, but they can't say with any level of certainty.
Mm-hmm.
Touching on your the question about Taproot, the benefits of Taproot certainly initially, as we've just gone live this week, in its current state now, the privacy benefits are minimal, but it does open the door to future improvements that are more significant. So what do we have right now in terms of privacy improvements? Well, the key one, I guess, is that when you open a Lightning channel, which I'll touch on in a minute, that now with Taproot looks identical to a single, like a traditional Bitcoin spend. So we can actually now hide the opening and closing of Lightning channels, so that previously they stood out on chain, so it was blatantly obvious. If you opened a Lightning channel, you could see and guess the size of that Lightning channel, and you could also see when it closed as well back onto the blockchain and settled, like you said. Now that looks exactly the same as a typical on-chain transaction. So we've got some good a good or an improved sort of improvement there on opening and closing Lightning channels. Once we've got the Lightning channel open, like you say, we sort of remove any future transactions that are made on that second layer within Lightning don't have what's called an on-chain footprint. So you might open a Lightning channel for 1 million sats. That could stay open for like 5 years, and you could make thousands of transactions back and forth with absolutely zero on-chain footprint, which is an improvement over every single transaction being recorded. It's not a silver bullet. There are still ways, and this is sort of getting probably far too complex for the purpose of this conversation, but there are still ways where a very sophisticated attacker can sort of try to monitor your off-chain activity to sort of try to sort of understand what's happening on that second layer. It requires much more sophistication, and it's obviously a live attack where they'd have to be sort of surveilling you that at the time that you're doing the transactions, whereas the on-chain is forever. So you might make a mistake now and that could come back to bite you in 10 years time. So there are benefits. The final thing I would say is that whilst the second layer like Lightning offers an improvement to sort of spending privacy, ultimately that channel is open from an on-chain transaction. So all of the stuff I've just said before about using CoinJoin and trying not to tie the Bitcoin to your personal identity, if you don't have that in order first, then the sort of Lightning channel that you open, it doesn't automatically sort of all of those mistakes disappear just because you're on Lightning. It's still tied to that initial history that's on chain as well. So a very sort of holistic approach is needed, which unfortunately isn't easy right now. We're getting there. But again, it's why I sort of really sort of harp on and preach about using no KYC sources, because if you can obtain Bitcoin and it's not tied to your identity, you're starting 3 or 4 steps ahead of everybody else that's trying to buy from a regulated exchange, tie that Bitcoin to their address, and then improve their privacy from then. You can't sort of wash that off, which is why the whole peer-to-peer marketplace to obtain Bitcoin is really, really important as a sort of a solid base for using Bitcoin privately.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of points there. Even I don't know if you got to read this article, so I don't know if you follow Jameson Lopp. He's the CTO of Casa or Keys.Casa or Hodl. No, Casa.Keys. It's basically they're a Bitcoin company, and I'm not just promoting them. I know he's the CTO of the company, and basically what they do is they offer doing multi-signature addresses, or they're a company that provide that to be more secure. So basically, they either do a 2 of 3 multi-sig or a 3 of 5 multi-sig, where you hold like it sounds, either 2 of the 3 keys and Casa holds 1, or you hold 3 keys and they hold 2. That's the theory, that if you were to lose one, or even if you were to be held at, I guess, a $5 wrench attack, or held at gunpoint, or someone to break into their house, even if you want to move Bitcoin, or the majority of it is kind of, it's kind of like enacting a vault, and you need multiple passwords in order to get access to the vault, to move your Bitcoin, to use your Bitcoin, or to do anything. It also helps you that if you accidentally lose one of your keys or seeds, what you can do is you can call Casa, and they can obviously help you. And they have security measures, not to just make it sound like, someone's holding a gun to my head, and, they can coerce me to get out, to give Casa, to give them the keys or the passwords in order to get your Bitcoin. But okay, so going down that rabbit hole of now explaining Casa and their product and service, there's a couple companies that do that as well. Jameson, back in 2017, I read his article. It came out 3 days ago. I'm recording on November 15th. The article came out on the 12th. It was called Swatting the Swatter. And ultimately, he goes through how he was basically attacked via the internet, that he was threatened that if he did not give up $50,000 in Bitcoin back in 2017, which is worth a lot more money nowadays. If he were to not give up $50,000 worth of Bitcoin, this internet personality or person, hacker, was going to make his life a living hell. And he basically is like, I'm not going to step down to tyrants. And he's like, I'm not doing this. And ultimately, a few days later, his local SWAT team showed up at his house, busted down his door, and he's like, I'm very thankful that I was not shot and killed in the process. Ultimately, the local law enforcement knew that this was a mistake, but the hacker had said that he was holding a hostage at his actual primary residence. And he goes through the long four-year escapade that just concluded very recently, at least in the last couple months, talking about how this hacker basically was able to find, through KYC information, was able to find out where he was, who he was in reality. Jameson Lopp is now his pseudo-anonymous name, and it's not tied to his real identity and his real name. But he's like, being a high up ranking official of a Bitcoin company who helps his clients store and save a lot of money in Bitcoin, he would be a primary target to not only just get his Bitcoin, but in theory, if you were to compromise him and they were able to use him or leverage him to be able to get the Bitcoin to many of his other clients. Now, saying this, they have ways to prevent it, that even if Casa was compromised, they would need at least another key or seed from one of its other clients. It wouldn't, even though Casa has either 1 or 2 keys, there's no way for them to release the Bitcoin without getting another seed phrase or key. But you could still see it being an attack surface or a way to getting them. Ultimately, he was fine. They found the attacker, and I won't go into too much detail, and he was not able to give up the identity of his attacker for various laws and reasons. But a very good article. It's about an 11-minute read, and it just kind of shows, to your point, QnA, the importance of non-KYC, or actually just kind of being more private. He does go through the whole story of saying how it's very difficult to remain private in your life. And he's like, he even said, he's like, he had to unravel his entire life, and it was not cheap. It was not easy. He ultimately doesn't live at the address that was compromised 4 years ago anymore. So he made a personal choice to actually move residencies, which he said he did not want to do, but it was in the benefit of the safety of him and his family and his well-being that he thought that was ultimately the right thing to do. So sorry for that, I guess, long-winded story. I think it's a very great article, and I think you should look it up and read it, as well as anyone that's listening to this. Bitcoin's always kind of a story of learning and reading and further growing your knowledge and what can happen, what can go wrong, and how ways to protect it. But I guess kind of like what you were alluding to. So what is non-KYC Bitcoin? I guess, can you explain that? And then ultimately, how do you acquire it? How is it more difficult? I know this is something that people aren't going to like to hear, but I know non-KYC Bitcoins actually is a premium, meaning that it actually costs more to acquire non-KYC Bitcoin because of the benefits of it being more private. I know I've looked at non-KYC exchanges and looked about, trying to either coin join my current stack that is in KYC Bitcoin, and then going forward to only buy non-KYC Bitcoin that is at a premium or costs more, but it's because it has that more privacy and the privacy nature of it, basically.
Yeah, I like to kind of flip it on its head and say that the no KYC price that you see is the real price, and that the price you see on Coinbase, Cash App, etc., regulated exchanges, the discounted price that you get for giving up your personal information. So I'll just leave you with that one. So what is non-KYC Bitcoin? It's essentially Bitcoin that you've obtained without having to go through the KYC procedure. So you've obtained it without having to give a selfie, your inside leg measurement, your dog's favorite color, etc., etc. So there's sort of 3 or 4 really popular ways to do that. The first one is a peer-to-peer exchange, which you've just alluded to. So this is essentially kind of a marketplace where people go on and they go on as sellers. They'll say, I want to sell 1 million sats. I accept these payment methods, and this is how much Bitcoin you'll get for it. And then people can go on as buyers that want to obtain Bitcoin privately, and they can put in and say, okay, I've got these payment methods open to me. What offers fit that bill? And it's just like I guess you can kind of look at it as like an Amazon marketplace type thing, where you go on and you can, if you're a buyer, you just look at what the sellers are offering. If there's one that takes your pick, you can take that trade. And then the software will facilitate that using an escrow system, so that it protects the buyer from getting screwed over. So essentially, the seller will have to kind of deposit the Bitcoin into an escrow account before you have to send any fiat funds over as a purchaser. So you're quite well protected as a purchaser. The risk is more on the seller side in terms of potentially being screwed over. I'll hand on heart say that I've been purchasing via no KYC sources for probably 18 months at least. And I have never been scammed. I've never even had a support ticket issue. It's been absolutely a rosy experience for me. Those instances do happen. It's more in terms of a griefing where let's say the seller might say that they haven't received the fiat. So what you'll have to do then is go through an arbitration process with the peer-to-peer exchange, the people that sort of act as arbiters. You'll be able to prove that you sent the fiat funds, and then they'll have a key into that escrow system where you can get the Bitcoin that's rightfully yours. So you're quite well protected as a buyer. So some examples of them to check out are HODL and BISC. They're 2 really good ones that I use regularly. Another one, no KYC option is, and probably the easiest way to get started, I probably should have started with this one really, is Bitcoin ATMs. If I'm going to guess your listener base is probably heavily US based, which is a good thing for Bitcoin ATMs because there are loads of them everywhere. If you go to a website called coinatmradar.com, you can punch in your your local area or wherever you want to buy from, and it'll just come up with like a little Google map, and it'll tell you where all the ATMs are, the limits, and where they are. And essentially, you can go up and buy with cash. Some of them do require a phone number, but there are services out there where you can pay a couple of dollars online to get like a burner number. So things like textverified.com, where they'll just give you a number, you can punch that into the ATM, that satisfies the requirements, and then you can put the cash in, give it a Bitcoin address, and the ATM will immediately send the funds directly to your wallet. So that's a really easy way to get started. Then we're getting a bit more a bit more difficult to get started with. So you can be pseudonymous online like myself and offer goods and services for Bitcoin. Is a great way. If you've got a skill or a product that you can sell online, you can do that directly for Bitcoin and receive that without, you don't have to provide any KYC information. Somebody's paying you. And then there is the option where you can mine. So again, a bit more of a difficult barrier to entry. It's nowhere near as difficult as some people paint it out to be, but it's probably not going to be your first option in terms of obtaining no KYC sats. So there's a couple of the options, and I'll just do a quick sort of shameless plug. I've got a no KYC sort of guide on my website. So if you could link that, maybe that'll be, there's a lot more information than what I've just covered there, and some of the other sort of options that are available for people to go and read up on.
Yeah, definitely. I have no problem linking to it. I know I've referenced it before myself. I think it's a great guide, and I thank you for putting that together, not just for yourself, but for all the people that use it. I think it's very helpful, and I really appreciate that insight. It's actually funny that you say that. Actually, my good friend and I, we just wanted to check out a Bitcoin ATM at our local mall. We know that there's two there. And I guess the company that was doing it, I don't want to reveal it and get myself in trouble, but the company that we went to, or the ATM that we went to, it was requiring not just a phone number, it was requiring, so we download their app, and then we basically like KYC ourselves on their app. You need a Bitcoin address, so whether a hot wallet, or you could, I guess, in theory, use a cold wallet if you want, with just that generates an address. And then the last thing you need is you need to use a debit card. So they wouldn't accept cash. So I thought it was very interesting that, like, I know that they're just trying to provide a service, but it seemed almost more like a KYC exchange, or even more so, because not only do you have their app, which is KYC'd in an attack vector, using your debit card from your bank, they would not accept cash. It was actually like specifically noted. It's like not only you're using a debit card that's linked to your bank account on top of all the information that they were trying to grab from you on the app. They didn't require us to take a picture of your credit card, but it required a phone number. You had to put your name and number in there, your name. And I think you even had to put your address. My buddy was the one that was going through it, but I just thought it was very ironic that it's like, okay, like I get that they're just trying to offer the service of buying Bitcoin there, but it would almost even seem better, as bad as this sounds, to just go through a KYC exchange than to have your banking information exposed through the ATM, and also by putting into the app. I guess in theory you could lie on the app, and I won't get into the legality or the morality of doing so, in lying about your address and place, and kind of like, even like you said, using a burner phone address through something that generates a randomly generated phone number, or something that'll pass that thing. But it seemed more of a hassle on top of the amount of fees. I mean, the fee that they were trying to charge was 9.5%, and that's even higher than what the non-KYC Bitcoin would be. It's like you're paying for a higher price and you're KYCing yourself twice. So I just thought it was very ironic.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, there's many different manufacturers of these ATMs and different providers. They're not all created equal, as you just well outlined. The ones that I believe in the US that just operate just off a phone number are the CoinFlip brand.
Okay.
So the website that I referenced earlier, Coin ATM Radar, you'll be able to see the brand of the machine as well as the location. So if there's a couple in your local area, look out for the CoinFlip ones. They're the ones that I believe you can buy. I think it's up to $1,000 at any one time, and it's just a phone number. So yeah, they're not all created equal, unfortunately. And I completely echo what you said, where that's probably worse than a KYC exchange. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was like the thing. I'm like, if I'm gonna buy KYC Bitcoin, I don't want to pay 9.5% as the fee. And then it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, it's way more expensive. I'm double KYC'd. It's like, not only is my bank and this, like, I don't know, it just seemed very it would seem like the worst possible experience. I know they're trying to get it into more people's minds, and definitely if it's your first time buying Bitcoin, I can understand how it'd be cool, and you may not understand the fees or realize how expensive that is, or how how bad it is for your KYC and OPSEC doing that. But I mean, it was cool to just check out. But yeah, definitely not all ATMs are created equal. And I'll try and find a CoinFlip one in the States. So I guess going on as we're getting towards the end of the interview here, and QnA. Thank you for coming on. I guess, what are the biggest attack vectors that the Bitcoin community should be wary of, in your opinion, and that we need to continuously fight against as a community as a whole? I know that's kind of a broad, overreaching brush, and there's many different things we should be worried about. But I guess, what would be the biggest attack vectors in your mind, and how do we fight those or combat those?
Yeah, I suppose the first one, and it probably won't be a surprise that I'm going to say this, is kind of increase in and overbearing regulations. KYC, I look at it unfortunately as like a creeping disease, where the larger and larger percentage of Bitcoin that is tagged essentially to real identities, it is absolutely an attack vector for the whole network. I've been there's many of us that talk about things like a 6102 attack, where we to go back to where personal holdings of gold back in the 70s, I believe, was outlawed in the US. It was known as Executive Order 6102. I think that personally there's a real threat of that happening with Bitcoin, where something similar like personal or self-custody is outlawed. Now, if the government has essentially got a big long list of who owns what Bitcoin, where they bought it, when they bought it from, and what addresses they sent it to, that is a massive, massive attack vector for the whole network, because it just gives them a list of people to send letters to say, we know you own Bitcoin. We just passed this law that says that you're now not allowed to hold it yourself. So we either want you to transfer it to this regulated exchange where we can see everything that you're doing with it, or we're going to take it off you. That probably, I'm going to say probably 2 or 3 years ago, before all the COVID hysteria, probably sounded really, really, I probably would have got laughed out off this podcast. I'm probably going to go on a limb here and say that doesn't actually sound out of the realms of possibility now, after we've seen governments around the world lock people in their houses and pass various draconian laws that completely infringe on people's rights. It unfortunately seems more and more possible that something like that might actually happen. So for me personally, that seems the biggest risk to the network, and again is why I'm so passionate about people trying to at least obtain a second side stack of Bitcoin, like you alluded to earlier, where most people are going to come into this space and they're going to go through a regulated exchange. I get it. I did exactly the same, but I'm just trying to say, well, this is a risk. What if this was to happen? You want to have another option. It's going to be a bit more of a headache for you to obtain, but it might come back to pay dividend in the years to come if the increasing trend of tyrannical government regulation continues its unwavering pace forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess, not to correct you, I think I've messed this up a bunch of times as well. I think the gold was banned from United States citizens in 1933 under FDR or Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then we suspended the gold window in 1971 in 1971, and then 1974 is when they did the full conversion of, they bought everyone's gold at a rate of I think it was $10, and then they basically dumped it back on the market. They bought everyone's at $10, and then they said the new price is like $33 or $35. Yeah. So they basically 3.5 times their money by basically confiscating all of it. I completely agree with your sentiment. I mean, we have Janet Yellen as the Treasury Secretary. I know you're in the UK, so I don't know if you know her, but I know Bitcoin Twitter is kind of always going after her, at least in the United States. She was commonly known as, she was the chairman of the Fed under the Obama administration, and then ultimately, once the administration changed hands with Trump coming in, she kind of sat in the background collecting fat checks from the big banks. She was making more money being basically a consultant, doing talks for half an hour or an hour at a rate of $250,000 to $300,000. She did quite well over the last couple of years, making about $7 million in total from just talks. And now she comes in as a Treasury Secretary, and I think the banks very much like her, because they're gonna, I think exactly what you said. The attack's gonna be, they're gonna go after it. It would be very difficult to go after Bitcoiners one-to-one or individually. So what they're going to do is they're going to go after the exchanges. They're going to say, give us a list of everyone that you sold to, and they're going to have that information because of KYC information. So they're going to say these people have X amount of Bitcoin. You're going to have to send them a notification saying that they either need to send it back to the exchange, or preferably they'd send it back to a bank under, US or whatever jurisdiction of government, basically exactly like the 6102 attack, that you're going to have to either send it to them and get it to them, where the bank's going to hold it, or, basically, like you said, outlawing private custody, or outlawing running a node, or outlawing doing all these various different things. And if you don't, the threat is jail time, or, being taxed like unreally. And I know the Bitcoiners always joke that we're going to say you lost in a boating accident, or that you sent it to an address that doesn't exist, or there's no way for you to achieve it. I think they're going to do what most governments try and do. They're going to try and be very harsh on the penalties for it. So, to scare you, or to fear you into abiding the rules, because the threat of going against it, whether it's illegal or legal or morally wrong or not, that, they basically have a stick over you, whether they don't go after you immediately. In the event that years down the road they find you doing something wrong, or even if you're not doing anything wrong, they'd be like, oh, listen, you didn't do this for us, we're going to throw you in jail or make your life a living hell for doing so. So I completely agree with your sentiment that that's where we're going to be attacked. And, exactly like your point, if you said this before the COVID pandemic, everyone would be like, this is crazy. This isn't going to happen. It's a different world. It's not the same as the 30s or even the 70s, but, you're kind of seeing the pressure of everyday world. Janet Yellen's even trying to pass the $600 spending limit, which I know a lot of the more conservative politicians are completely against. The overreach of, I know, especially in the United States, the IRS wants to know any transaction over $10,000. And that was set in the 30s as well, or at least way back in the day, or maybe it was set in the 70s. I forget now. But when you think of inflation and how much the dollar has devalued, the $10,000 that you're being monitored in the 70s or the 30s, like I said, I forget. It's now, when you look at it, it's worth like $71,000 would be the equivalent in the time that they enacted it, versus the dollars that they've basically inflated away with all the money printing. So really at 10,000, they were only trying to go after the high net worth and the high transaction, or the high value transactions that were occurring. They claimed they were going after the rich, but with inflating the money away, $10,000 it's kind of one of the sayings that $10,000 is not a lot of money to have, but it is a lot of money to owe. But yeah, now it's kind of becoming the everyday norm, with basically all the money printing and helicopter money that's going on around the world. And it's only a matter of time. The running joke is that if hyperinflation were to occur, $10,000 might not buy you a loaf of bread or a bunch of eggs. So, we're going down that path that they're trying to get more and more information on more and more people. And, they've never, in the history of their legislation, it's never like, oh, we need to bump up that $10,000 to now be $70,000 or $100,000 or whatever it may be. They always want more. Janet Yellen in the latest bill is trying to get $600 limits. If you transact in any way $600, and I'm sure you, as well as in the United States, $600 is, the cost of a lot of people's rent. So they can have access to your bank account. If you basically pay rent, they have reasons to snoop around and look at any of your transactions with anything that you do. And it's very scary. They of course make it out to be like, oh, we're trying to protect you. We're trying to stop illicit activity. We're trying to do all these different things, but they're kind of just really what they want is more and more information. And they want to have a gotcha moment where they can basically say anyone doing anything is illegal. And it's scary. It's very scary.
Yeah, very scary. It's all about control, like you say. You absolutely hit the nail on the head. And unfortunately, once this stuff gets passed, nothing ever gets. No government regulation is ever rolled or scaled back. It only ever goes one way, which I believe is why that we need to fight this. We need to opt out with tools like Bitcoin, and we need to do it properly and obtain it via methods that allow us to fight back against this sort of tyranny.
One of my favorite quotes I heard very recently is, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution. And I think that
yeah, I like that one.
That's a very good explanation of, oh, it's only temporary spending the gold with it. Oh, it's only temporary monitoring transactions. Oh, it's only temporary. And then, it goes through many different administrations. And this is something that's a fault of the left and the right. It doesn't matter where you fall politically, whether they're Republican or Democrat or liberal. I won't go into I guess the UK parties because I don't know their political system as well, but left or right, if you keep it very simple, whether it's enacted under a Republican or a Democrat or left or a right, it's not, you would think that the other party would come in and remove it, but they see the value in control. And, as much as they act as two different parties, this sounds very conspiracy theory-esque, but they act more as one, a lot more often than not. They see, oh, my opponent used this to take advantage or use control of other people. Well, I'm not going to remove something that gives me an advantage now as well. And then, it always stays in place because that's kind of another lever of power that they can hold as well as their enemies. So it's very scary, very, very scary world that we go into. So as we wrap up here, I guess I just wanted to have one last question, more philosophical in nature. I guess, what do you think Bitcoin's doing for the world, QnA, and how is that beneficial?
Ooh, wow. Right. So Bitcoin is many things to many different people. The two main use cases for me is wealth preservation in a climate where governments are printing money ad infinitum to I saw a tweet this morning. Funny enough, I retweeted it just before I came on to speak to you, Chris, and it was Joe Biden saying that inflation's getting too bad, so we need to pass the Build Back Better bill, which outlines a $3 trillion spending bill. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah.
So he's essentially saying that he wants to print his way out of inflation. So, it doesn't take a genius to work out that that's not going to end well. So yeah, wealth preservation, Bitcoin enables anybody on the planet with a mobile phone to create a wallet and to store their wealth in a method that cannot be messed around with by governments, can't be inflated away. It's a pristine asset that allows, it's the great equalizer in terms of wealth preservation. It's a very, very low barrier to entry. So that'll probably be the first and the main use case right now. The other one is a little bit of a catchphrase that I like to use, and it's not mine. I stole it from somebody that I look up to. Is that Bitcoin is for making the transactions that they don't want you to make. So most people in the Western world don't sort of live that much. It's changing pretty quickly, but don't live that much under a tyrannical government. The power of Bitcoin and its pseudonymity and the fact that there's no trusted third parties means that, again, anybody with a mobile phone or a computer can transact with anybody else who has that same tool anywhere in the world. So if I wanted to send a transaction to somebody in Iran, I don't know why I'd want to do that, but if I wanted to use my bank from the UK, I've got no chance. They're gonna probably come knocking on my door and ask me what I'm playing at. But I can do that with Bitcoin. If I want to send you, $50,000 tomorrow, if I want to do that with the legacy system, there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of paperwork to fill in. Whereas with Bitcoin, I can do that in, it'll take me a couple of seconds to construct and send the transaction to you, and then roughly 10 minutes for that to be confirmed. Absolutely final settlement. And I can do that with any one of the nearly 8 billion people on this planet if they've got a mobile phone. And the power and the gravity of that still isn't widely understood. And I think when people, don't get me wrong, the knowledge of this is increasing, but when we pass that tipping point, I think we're going to be looking at a very, very different world, a much better world. A lot of what I've said today is probably going to be come across as quite pessimistic and quite as if I've got a really jaded view of the space. But I'm very, very optimistic about the future and the power that Bitcoin's going to put into the hand of individuals.
Yeah, I completely agree. It just kind of adding to two different things. I know aside from Biden, also Trudeau up in Canada, I think Bitcoin helps be the signal amongst the noise. Like Biden was even saying with the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better bill, he was saying the 3.5 trillion is going to cost $0. And like, I was like, in what crazy world is it going to not cost any money? But like, these are just the talking points that they say that like, I almost think that they think their people are stupid. Like, you know, oh, the 3.5 trillion is not going to cost any money. It's like, yeah, it is. Our taxes are going to go up. You know, the amount of privacy and control that you're going to have is going to go down. Like, everything costs everything, whether it's, you know, may not be a fiat like cost. Like, there's going to be, don't worry, they will get the money one way or another, whether, you know, all of a sudden the price for businesses goes up, the price for your taxes goes up, the privacy, like, you know, you lose something when they say it's going to be free. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Trudeau and Biden were both saying that their Build Back Better packages are going to cost $0, but then they say, you know, I think Trudeau's is 400 billion and Biden's is 3.5 trillion, so even orders of magnitude bigger than his. But it's just, it's the insanity of it all. There's actually this crazy story. I know you're saying that if you're trying to send $50,000, you know, you have to go through so many obscure hoops, forms, paperwork, and all that. This is kind of more of a sad story, but there was a U.S. politician. I believe he's a congressman from Ohio. Long story short, I think he was in the military, and him and his wife were stationed in China, going back a few years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And ultimately, they were there. He was abroad, or maybe even just working at the embassy. His wife became pregnant, and they were expected to have their first child. So this is going back in 2014, 2015, like I said, or 2016, that they were going to have their first child. So they were there, and ultimately things were going along fine. And then the doctors noted that his wife, the baby, was in distress. So I'm not quite sure what happened, but basically they were saying that they were going to have to give birth to the baby earlier. And with that, there was going to be added complications of the matter. So China is very different, not just from a political standpoint, but also from just how their healthcare system is to the United States and even the UK for that matter. So when they were going to be birthing the baby, in Chinese culture or their healthcare system, you actually have to pay for any procedure or operation you're going to up front, whether that is cancer, whether that is a birth, whether that is whatever. So since they were having a complicated C-section, the cost was actually like $40,000 equivalent. So in doing that, he didn't have $40,000 on hand in his currency or in the Chinese yuan on him. So ultimately he phoned home. He's a U.S. Senator, congressman, called his mom and his dad and said, hey, mom, dad, like, I really need $40,000. Can you wire it to us from your bank account to here? I'll pay you back, whatever. Long story short. So they try and wire the money from the United States to China. And ultimately, as you can imagine, between the adversarial relationship between China and the US, they definitely flagged this. Why are you trying to wire $50,000? Who is this going for? And ultimately, they were up against the clock because the baby was in distress. So long story short, ultimately, the money was wired to the long location. It was about 10 hours away from where they were. He was going to drive to the location. He got to the bank. They said that they couldn't give him the money because he was a U.S. citizen, not a Chinese citizen. Long story short, 12 days had passed, and ultimately, they were not able to get the money to the hospital where his wife and the baby resided. And ultimately, his child succumbed to the complications of the operation or lack thereof. So it's kind of a very horrible story. And, you know, I don't wish that on anyone, whether it's my biggest rival or political opponent or whatever. And ultimately, he said that had he been into Bitcoin or had he had this alternate way of paying that was more peer-to-peer, he really thinks that his son would be alive today. And this congressman is actually more on the left side, which ironically, I know in the media, it always seems that the left is against Bitcoin and they want control. And, you know, where the more conservative right are saying Bitcoin's a good thing, you know, you should be given your liberties and your rights and your privacy. I think I'll leave this off on this one last quote. You know, I've always heard that, you know, Bitcoin's for enemies. And I think that that's very true. And it doesn't even have to be for enemies. You know, I think anyone, whether you agree or disagree with me politically or my economic views or whatever it may be, like, I do not think this guy and his wife should have lost their baby due to the complications with our current banking system and basically them excluding payment because of someone that could be seen as a threat. I mean, he was just trying to send money from his parents to him to pay for an operation to ultimately save his baby's life. And it's very, very sad. And, I wish it was a more robust system. I wish it was more welcomed by the legacy system. We definitely have a fight on our hands, but I'm very hopeful for the future, and that this can be a good thing and not a bad thing, like a lot of the political elite or just elite in general make it out to be.
Yeah, I mean, that story is absolutely heartbreaking, and unfortunately, I'm sure there's many others like it, but I suppose that trying to flip it to a positive is that now people have an option to opt out, and there are alternatives, and obviously Bitcoin is provides that alternative, and I guess we just need to get the word out there and keep spreading the power that this tool can provide the individual.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, like I said, he's it's always good to have someone, I guess, on the other side of the aisle. Like I said, more conservatives are pro Bitcoin. It always seems the left is against it, but he is a Democrat that is trying to educate his peers on the benefits of Bitcoin. He specifically says cryptocurrencies. I know that's kind of a word that I hate even using myself, but he said the benefits of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies that could have been used on that day to help save his son's life. So QnA, thank you so much. I know it's been over an hour now. It's been a pleasure having you on. I guess before I let you get going, I'm going to ask you a couple, two quick questions. And then the last question will be, you can plug anything that you're working on, whether it be as a company you're working at, or a lot of the privacy tools or websites that you have up that people can go to. So thank you, like I said, once again for coming on the show. So I guess what's been your biggest investing mistake or business mistake that you've made in your career?
Taking investment advice from YouTube would be my worst investment. Faux pas, I guess. Definitely taking. Yeah, that would be. Don't take investment advice from YouTube. Always do your own research and do it well.
I think that's a great one. I think there are a lot of good content on YouTube, but there's way more bad information on YouTube compared to good information. So definitely always seek for the truth and kind of always, kind of do your own research, like you said. So I guess moving on, what's your favorite book, podcast, YouTube channel, or website that you like to go to for investing information or just Bitcoin information in general?
Yeah, so I guess my kind of investing career is Bitcoin, so it is going to be a Bitcoin centric answer. Favorite book would be, again, I alluded to it at the start, I'm kind of more interested in the technical aspects. So my two favorite books are Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos and Grokking Bitcoin by Kalle Rosenbaum. Both very technical books. A lot of what's in that book is even way over my head, but if you immerse yourself and surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, eventually some of it sticks, and that has been the case with me. So they're my favorite books. Favorite podcast, oh god, there's so many. I suppose the two that have been pivotal for me in terms of my personal Bitcoin education would be Tales from the Crypt and Stefan Livera, and YouTube channel. Probably, I mean, Bitcoin educational content on YouTube isn't great. The BTC Sessions is obviously way up there in terms of using Bitcoin. The back catalog that he's got is fantastic, and the way that he puts it across is really good and approachable.
Yeah, thanks so much. So once again, thank you so much for your time, QnA. It's been an absolute pleasure and a blast. I even though we live on two very different continents and very different things, it's always great talking to other Bitcoiners. I love doing this podcast just kind of selfishly to meet people aside from learning. So it's been a pleasure having you on. I guess if someone wanted to learn more about you, your business, or your website, where can they go to find out that information?
Yeah, completely echo what you just said. Had a blast for the last little over an hour. Thank you for everything that you do. Education from audio is something that I've gained a massive amount out of since I got into the space. So thank you for what you're doing and keep up the good work. If people want to learn about me, my website is bitcoiner.guide. On Twitter, I am at BitcoinQ_A. And the company that I work for, we sell air-gapped hardware devices geared towards newcomers to the space. We make it very easy to use. If you want to get your hands, or you'll have to pre-order one now because we're sold out, unfortunately. But if you go to foundationdevices.com, you can check out our device called Passport. We've just opened for pre-orders for our batch 2 device, which is due to ship in February. If you pre-order with sats, if you pay us in Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin price goes up between when you pre-order and when we actually ship the device, we'll give you the difference back so that you don't lose out on any Bitcoin exposure from that as well. So kind of a unique sort of prospect that I wanted to plug, really, because I've not seen anybody do that before, and I thought it was really, really cool.
I saw a tweet. I think you put it out. I think that's so cool. I think that is so honest and open in the way that Bitcoin is. And I think that's really, really cool that you basically, someone pre-ordered and then they kind of lose out on their gains. So I really appreciate that. And I'll definitely have to check it out. February is my birthday month. So maybe I'll ask a family member to get it for me.
Perfect. There you go.
I'll shop for myself. So QnA, thank you so much for coming on. As always, everyone, thank you for listening to the Amateur Investors Podcast. You can find us at theamateurinvestors.squarespace.com. You can find us Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all the social media platforms. So thank you so much. Have a good one, everyone. Talk to you later.